they call them.
Tribal class, DDG 282, 283.
DDH. The H stands for helicopter. D for destroyer. And yeah, I was on all 4 tribal classes except for the Iroquois. So I was on the Algonquin, Huron, and I was on some smaller boats. I was on the Regina, which is a CPF. Didn't spend much time there. I was on the Anticosti, which was a former, sort of like a minesweeper. I think it was a minesweeper, actually designed to be, but we didn't use it for one. There was some diving unit boats, the Fleet Diving Unit in Victoria. Where else did I serve? What other boats? Oh, up in Nanoose, I was on the Egret and the Pelican, which is a really old boat. It was actually originally a sailboat for patrolling the torpedo range. Torpedo range was used by the Americans and Canadians to test torpedoes and for R&D, research and development. And ships would come up and they do noise trials because we had microphones under the water, like 52 microphones or something. And they would monitor, the ships would do passes back and forth, and they'd monitor the noise the ship was giving off. And they'd shut down equipment, start up equipment to see the differences. Because you want to have like a wartime state where you could have minimal noise if there's submarines around or whatever. So there's certain gear you would shut down so the ship would emit less underwater noise. So they would always test to see what gear was making the most noise, and there was also things they could do to make gear make less noise. So if they found, oh well, this generator's making a lot of noise, maybe they could change the mounts, the rubber mounts, or they could do things. When we did this, we had everything tied down, so things weren't vibrating. Like say you had spare parts, you had to make sure everything was like secured, so you weren't getting excess noise. But yeah, that was Nanoose, and that's about it. That's about the only ships I served on.
You participated in minesweeping operations in the Gulf?
Not minesweeping, no.
Anti-piracy
Yeah.
operations.
Yeah. And we checked a lot of boats there, like civilian boats, to see if they were carrying banned goods, like weapons or ammunition. And did the same thing in the Adriatic Sea for the Yugoslav conflict. Basically patrolled a grid. We were assigned a grid, and for 2 weeks or something we'd go out and go back and forth, and any boats that entered that grid, we'd go apprehend them and check their cargo, basically. Yeah. Did a lot of trips, been to a lot of places. Asia, South America, Europe, the Gulf.
Do you remember the date in which you graduated from basic training, boot camp?
Yeah, it would have been, started November 11th, Remembrance Day of '88, and graduated 8 weeks later, so that would have been, I don't know. We went home for Christmas for a week, so it would have been 9 weeks. So we're probably looking at February, mid-February, something like that, end February.
This training was in Nova Scotia.
Yes, yeah, Cornwallis, yeah. So we took a flight, the Milk Run. It was a CF flight, like a 707 or something. And it stopped in every major center across Canada. And I had a cold, so my ears, every time we popped, they'd fly at a higher elevation than civilian planes. So it was like up, down, all the way across country. My ears were just, every time we landed, just like sharp knife in the ear. And we finally got there, and we had to take a bus to the base, which is a couple-hour ride, Cornwallis, from Nova Scotia, from Halifax. And yeah, we were greeted by guys in army fatigues screaming at us and smacking their pace sticks on the ground and yelling at us. Yeah, dude, they didn't waste any time. Like, as soon as you were there, as soon as you got off that plane,
Gave you a warm welcome to
yeah.
the East Provinces.
Yeah, they kicked you up, kicked you into shape really quick. Yeah, and they could swear to you back in those days and insult your mother and everything. But yeah, it was winter time, so I'd never seen a winter like that because I was from out west and Vancouver. So I'd never seen snow and cold like that. That was like me, that was a shock. But yeah, I got through it, and then I got posted to Victoria, Esquimalt, and they flew us on that same flight up and down, stopping everywhere across the country. And Victoria Airport was snowed out, so they flew us into Comox, and we stayed there. And they told us you don't have to salute officers on the base. And we were like, what? After it'd been drilled into us that you need to salute officers. And yeah, it was great there. We had ice cream in the cafeteria and everything. It was a great time. And then I think we took a bus from Comox down to Victoria when the weather cleared up a couple days later. And then I started my trades training there. They call it the Threes course. And I did that for like 2 years. Well, no, the course was only like 3 months, and then I went to the Huron. And on the Huron, our first trip was to a submarine base in Washington State. It was not Bangor. Was it Bangor? Anyways, no, I can't remember the name of it. But that was just a few-day trip, and then our next trip was Alaska, the Aleutians, and that was pretty hectic. It was 28 days at sea, which to me was quite the culture shock. And once we got up there, it was really rough. Lost our VDS, which was our looks like a torpedo that listens for submarines. That snapped, a cable, big thick cable.
I remember that incident.
Yeah.
It fell right off the snapped and fell right off.
I was
back
in
of
the
boat.
back of the ship inspecting the steering when it happened, and it sounded like a gunshot went off. So just like a gunshot. And then I ran back to the machinery control room and said, what was that? What was that? I was like a new, fresh guy. And they said, oh, we lost the VDS. I didn't even know what a VDS was. Like, I was so new there. So it ended up on that trip, they had this guy working in the cafeteria that really knew boilers good. So they took him out of there to work on the boiler that was breaking down. Because we needed boilers for fresh water. We had evaporators. We didn't have reverse osmosis in those days. Didn't get reverse osmosis until we went to the Gulf. And
In '91, that was the first Gulf.
yeah. And so they put me in the cafeteria, and I didn't let that go. It didn't go over well. I was not happy. I didn't join the Navy to wash dishes.
In Alaska?
Yeah. And then so we went to Juneau. I actually went to this place called Glacier Bay too. It's a tourist thing where the glacier comes down to the water. You got to transit in for a bit. But Juneau was okay. Bit of a party. We rented a hotel and filled the bathtub with ice and booze. And yeah, we had a good time. But 28 days at sea to get there was pretty brutal for your first big trip. Yeah. And then so I stayed on the Huron until we took it over to Halifax for the Trump refit, which is I think it was a $2 billion refit on all 4 ships. And I asked to get transferred to the East Coast because I wanted to see Europe and stuff. And my boss made it happen. My chief engineer, he made it happen with a phone call. And I stayed on the East Coast, and the rest of the guys flew home, left the ship there. And the ship I went to was the Algonquin. It was the first ship to be Trumped, to come out of Trump. So I actually was the only guy to go from the last pre-Trump ship, stepped right onto a Trump ship. So I saw the changes firsthand, like the next day kind of thing. Like I sailed on the old version and went right to the new version. While everybody else, the guys that went back to Victoria to wait for the Huron, they spent like 2 years waiting for it, and then they had a 2-year break in between. But I went right back at the action and got the new Trump technology that was installed. So one of the things was the stability, because the pre-Trump is super bouncy. They installed a saltwater fuel system that compensated for when the tanks got low, the salt water came in and made the ship more stable, because the ships were inherently top heavy.
This is a mixture of fuel and salt water then.
Yeah, and the ships were designed with just way too much weight up top. There was even pig iron in the hull, like at the bottom in the bilge of the engine rooms and stuff in the bottom to make the ship more stable. And I'm talking just long bricks of steel, of iron, laid in the hull. So, I mean, that's not good for your fuel economy or speed, obviously, but they had to do something. I mean, we were bouncing all over the place, side to side. I remember like my feet going on the side of the walls walking down the hallway sometimes. And And even on the Atlantic, which is much rougher, it must have been even worse out there for those guys pre-Trump, because at least I was pre-Trump on the West Coast, which you can get some rough weather, but I mean, there is a lot of calm stuff out here. Yeah, so I was on the Algonquin for a few years, and I had to do all the sea trials, a lot of sea trials. After the first Trump ship, we'd go out for a couple of weeks just outside Halifax Harbor, come back in. We did this for months and months, because they had to prove everything. Everything had to be proven, and they had to sign off on the contractors that did the work before they, would get fully paid, I guess. And yeah, a lot of trials. Trials suck. You just go out to sea for 2 weeks, you come back in. You go to sea for 2 weeks. So once all that was done, I don't remember our first trip, but we were supposed to go on a NATO. Big NATO, like St. Petersburg, Belgium, Liverpool. Looking forward to that trip big time. And it happened that the Yugoslav conflict was going on, so they switched our NATO to a Yugoslav trip, and the NATO was supposed to be in Norfolk for the turnover to relieve the other Canadian ship, and instead they said, once we got to Norfolk, you guys are going to the Yugoslav conflict. And then all these semi-trucks were coming down with all this like bacon and all these supplies and all this other stuff. And we ended up leaving Norfolk, and so much for our exciting Europe trip. We ended up doing grids in the Adriatic Sea. So we sailed through the Med and into the Adriatic Sea. But yeah, before I left the West Coast, I was on the Huron, and we went to the Gulf. And through the Panama Canal, Halifax, the Azores, which we had a ruptured fuel tank. Somebody overfilled the fuel tank. It was like action stations, alarms going off, fuel in the petty officer's floor on their deck where they sleep. Fuel, we were like sopping up fuel. It was at nighttime. Oh man, all these fuel rags on the deck, on the bow. Yeah, it was just crazy. I was actually on the fueling team, and all I heard was stop fueling, stop pumping. And that was it. So then we got out of the Azores, got repairs in Gibraltar, sailed from Gibraltar to the Suez Canal, let all these people on board to sell us like Egyptian stuff, like souvenirs that you'd buy around the pyramids and stuff, all this old Egyptian stuff. And anyways, we had to pick up an anchor there, because in order, the 280 class only had one anchor. So in order to go through the Suez Canal, it's a law, you have to have 2 anchors. So we actually had an anchor brought on board, and it was just laying on the deck, on top of the deck. I didn't even know if it worked. I didn't even know if it would actually work. So we were carrying this anchor, extra anchor, just to meet the conditions of going through the Suez. And then you get a pilot comes on, takes you through. And as we're going through the Suez Canal, there was tanks on roads all along the side going up and down. And then on the other side was like Lebanon and stuff, and they had these missile launchers there. And so that was all to do with the conflicts that those potentially guys could have. But it was pretty interesting. And then we had, there was all kinds of gear put on the Huron for that trip too. Like we had these 45 mils guns or whatever. No, we had these guns on the side, on the boat deck, that were built in 1945, Bofors, super old guns. They painted the whole upper deck white to reflect the heat, because our AC, didn't have good AC on those ships. They actually installed another AC unit. They put the rod on, the reverse osmosis, so we didn't have to rely on evaporators and boiler steam to make fresh water.
This was all in the Trump refit?
Yeah, no, this was just for the
Prior.
Gulf. This was to get ready for the Gulf, yeah. So it was a rod unit for water, painted the decks white, the 2 guns on each side of the boat deck, the Bofors, built in 1945, even on the tag it said 1945. What else? An extra AC unit. What else did we do? Oh, they put a Sea Whiz on, which is that Gatling gun. It looks like a big tower, white tower, and it's got the rotating barrels. But they put that on top of the hangar, and I think that's about it. Yeah, it was a pretty interesting trip. They gave us these Tilly hats, and we had some gear that was more for hot weather, like shorts and stuff like that, and sandals, which are ridiculous on a ship. Nobody's wearing different sandals, except when you're off break and you're like laying on the flight deck or something. But yeah, so that went pretty good. And then after that, when we came back, it was around the world, circumference around the world. So it left Halifax or Victoria, through the Panama, into the Med, through the Suez, into the Gulf, did our gig there, left there, went around India, went through Singapore, stopped there, and then came up to Guam, and then Hawaii, and then back to Victoria. So circumnavigated the globe. Yeah, but going back to the Athabascan in the Gulf, or in the Adriatic Sea, the Yugoslavia thing, that went off pretty well. We made a couple of port visits to Turkey, Italy, the Azores. No, not the Azores. Palma of Mallorca, Barcelona, and I think that was it. Oh, Madrid. No, not Madrid. Lisbon. Sorry, Lisbon. And that was it. That's all the ports on that trip. I actually got to fly home for 2 weeks on that trip. They had a policy in place that if you're on a trip over, say, 4 months or 5 months, you could get, if there was a window, a certain amount of the crew could leave instead of, I think I went for a week. A certain amount of the crew could leave for a week, a certain percent to go home, and it would be covered, paid for. So I took advantage of that. I was lucky enough to get on that. Not everybody wanted to go. It went pretty good. And then, yeah, I remember we used to go to Puerto Rico a lot on the East Coast because there's a big base down there, and Norfolk. And we went to South America. We did South America. I think it was called Cantas or something like that, or I can't remember the name. And it was a big South America multinational trip with ships from all different countries. On the West Coast, I did some rim packs, I did 2 rim packs because I did come back to the West Coast later on. But yeah, the South America trip was Buenos Aires. It's the one in Brazil, the big city in Brazil.
Rio de Janeiro.
Rio, yeah. We did Uruguay, Montevideo, and back to Puerto Rico. We actually almost ran out of fuel on that trip because it was such a long transit from Puerto Rico down to Brazil. There was talk of running the aircraft JP5 fuel, and there's a spool piece you can put into the main engines. And that was in place if we had to. We had come up with the whole what we have to do it, because it's not something you typically do. And yeah, we were concerned we were going to run out of fuel. And when we did get fuel, it was at the top of Brazil. I can't remember the name of the place, but it was a small town. And it was actually being pumped on by trucks. We had trucks pull up and with nozzles and like fill in the ship. And yeah, it took forever to fuel. Super slow. And I remember giant cockroaches running all over the jetty. And we're feeding the guys because they were there so long. We were feeding them, the guys pumping the fuel in. And yeah, it was quite the scenario. I remember going to Hawaii once too in Pearl Harbor, and we had to fill up our synthetic oil tank. And the only supply they had for synthetic oil for what we need, the type, was in 1 gallon or 1 liter cans. And we were popping each can over, filling the tank, and that took forever too. But yeah. So yeah, I did that South America trip. Came back, did a few more trips. I've been to Montreal out there. Been to and then I got posted to. I asked to get off the ship. I just asked for a change, and I asked to go to the Anacostia, which was designated minesweeper, but I never did really any minesweeping. We did a real cool trip around Newfoundland. We took the RCMP with us, and we went to all the little towns around Newfoundland, and we'd go to set up a drug display thing. They had samples of like cocaine and weed and stuff. It was like an informative drug thing that we did with the RCMP to educate people about drugs and, not to use them. But we hit all these little towns in Newfoundland. It was amazing seeing icebergs, these huge icebergs. It was a pretty cool trip. Super friendly people. Right around Newfoundland. Really good reception. I think one place was Bonavista, Vista, Fogo Island. There was a music festival in Fogo Island. It was pretty cool. And came back from that. What other trips did I do out there?
You remember
I
when?
went to Boston a lot, New York City. That's about it. Yeah, and then I ended up, like I said, I was on the Anacostia, and I went on my fives course, my trades course, fives, which is your technician's course. That's when you become a technician. And I did that course, and then they said it was a 18-month course, pretty brutal course. A lot of technical stuff, like academic stuff, like physics and things like that, and sciences. And so thermodynamics, and we came back to. I at the end of the course, they said they were looking to post guys out west. So I said, okay, I'll go. Went home, asked the wife, said, "Are you okay with that?" "Yeah, okay, we need a change." So went out west, and guess by then the Algonquin was on the west coast. So guess what boat I went back on? The Algonquin. Yeah. Second stint on the Algonquin.
At this point, were you appointed master seaman?
Leading seaman, because you don't get your master's, you need to get your tech course done and your package done on a ship before you can get promoted. That's one of the prerequisites as an engineer. So back on the Algonquin, and did a big rim pack there. It was a pretty cool trip. That's when I got my package completed, and I became a full-fledged tech, and got the certificate as being a technician rather than a mechanic, because before you get your fives tech course, you're considered a mechanic. Once you get that course, you become a technician. And you get a big bump in big bump in pay. You're talking like $300 a month, which is huge. Maybe even more than that. I remember it was substantial. But it took me a long time to get that, because the trade went stagnant. It took me 12 years to get there, and so I lost a lot of money. Normally you'd have that course after 5 years, but what they did is they took these METTEP guys, and they took them off the street, put them in college in Cornwall, Ontario, as engineers, gave them a 2-year college course or something, or 3-year, and they put them on the ship as master seaman. And then eventually they changed it because they knew there was a problem. They changed it to leading seaman, but they were still technicians. So us guys that came in the normal way through the recruiting center as ordinary seamen, we got screwed because the progression just stopped, because all these guys were coming in from the middle as master seaman or leading seaman from college. And so we hit this log jam, and a lot of us never got our fives course until 10 years in, 11 years in, and we lost a lot of money. That was like, say you should have got your tech pay after 5 years. We didn't get it. We lost it 7 years of tech pay. We didn't get it till after 12. So we were bitter. And it wasn't just that. You were doing the shit jobs. You were doing the shit jobs for 12 years, because the guys that are mechanics, just mechanics and not technicians, they still have to do all the shitty jobs that the guys above them don't do, that the technicians don't do. So yeah, it was a rough go, and there's a lot of disgruntled, disappointed guys that were out of money, that are not making the money they should have been, and they weren't doing the work they should have been. Like